Hi everyone, my name is Ben and welcome to Fantasy F1 Tips, your home for the latest news, insights and thoughts on Fantasy Formula 1. In this video I'm going to be taking you through my review of the Silverstone Grand Prix. I'll share some news and info in advance of this weekend's Hungarian Grand Prix and I'll show you the current plans for my Fantasy F1 team. Let's get into it. So Silverstone went pretty well for me with 255 points in the end, lifting me to an overall rank of 331st in the world out of over 2 million managers now. So let's have a look in more detail at the team. Verstappen still a straightforward captain with a pole victory and fastest lap this week, giving 92 points in total. Perez, even though he seems to be struggling in qualifying in the Red Bull, his overtakes of 9 this week still makes his price worthwhile as he's getting more points consistently than Hamilton, Leclerc and the other alternatives in that bracket. Alonso managed 12 points after qualifying 9th and gaining 2 positions in the race to finish 7th. I'd say Alonso is still getting sufficient points for his price, but Aston Martin have gone backwards quite a bit in the last few races, and so the question of Alonso versus Norris will start to come for some in the near future. My decision to switch Stroll to Piastri worked out quite well, with Piastri's 20 points from a 3rd place qualification and 4th place finish in the UK versus Stroll's 2 points. McLaren's upgrades have really brought them into the discussion for people's fantasy teams. I'll discuss more on Piastri versus Stroll a bit later on. Zhou's 6 points was sufficient, above Tsunoda on 3 and below Albon on 8 as the alternatives. It's always a coin toss between Zhou and Tsunoda, but Sargent and Albon could come into this discussion with their recent upgrades for the Williams. Finally, the call to stick with Aston Martin over McLaren did not go well. 22 points for Aston Martin versus 68 for McLaren is a painful 46-point swing, but very well done to those that braved the decision. It will be a similarly tough call this weekend in Hungary. Let's look into the preview. So the first thing to note this weekend is the price changes. There's been some big swings this week for McLaren, with Norris's price rising 1.5 million to 12.9 million overall. Piastri and McLaren both increasing 1 million respectively. This may make the Aston Martin to McLaren switch a bit more difficult for some managers who could be priced out. Another thing to mention this week is upgrades. Red Bull are rumoured to have upgrades worth 0.2 per lap, but assuming we all have them in our teams already, this won't cause too many transfers. McLaren will also have the final 25% of their big upgrade that we've seen so far in Austria and Silverstone, but Aston Martin and AlphaTauri will also be bringing in upgrades. The track itself will also play a part in our teams this week. The Hungaroring is known for its low speed corners and difficulty in overtaking, not too dissimilar from Monaco. This means two things. Firstly, with a difficulty overtaking, starting position will be more important than usual for this race, so watch out for qualifying. Secondly, cars which excelled in Monaco, namely Aston Martin, well, Alonso anyway, and Alpine may be shrewd picks this week. Final bit of news, Ricciardo is back. He has slotted himself into Nick de Vries's seat for the rest of the season, and he would also slot himself into the discussion of which budget driver to pick this week. Today's area of focus that I wanted to jump into was Piastri versus Stroll and the decision around that. McLaren have had a resurgence over the last 2 races, which has left Piastri with 2 lots of 20-point races. The upgrades to the McLaren have worked well, and the question is whether they would track specific results in Austria and Silverstone, or whether it's a sign that they are now up there with Ferrari, Mercedes and Aston Martin. If the latter, Piastri could be a very cheap option for our teams. However, whilst Aston Martin have had a few poor results in the last few weeks, this is a track in the Hungaroring that will really suit them and could put them back in the conversation of a podium. Whilst a podium is more likely to be won by Alonso, with 0 so far this season for Stroll, Lance has still managed over 15 points in 5 of the races this season, compared to 3 15-plus point finishes for Piastri. With the cars even, I would pick Piastri due to his ability to get close to Norris in some races, while Stroll is usually a good few places behind Alonso. Therefore, I think Piastri has a higher chance of a podium if the cars were equal, and therefore a significant points haul if the car is working well. However, I do feel that Aston Martin will have the slight advantage weekend due to the low-speed corners. Overall, I'm on the fence for Aston Martin versus McLaren as the constructor decision, but for this race, I'm going to stick with Piastri over Stroll as I feel there's a higher potential upside there. So let's have a look at how my team is lining up for the Hungarian Grand Prix. Firstly, Verstappen will be DRS boosted. He's now on 6 wins in a row, almost unstoppable, and I don't have too many other thoughts than put your captaincy on him. If you do still have your 3x DRS boost chip, I would save it for a sprint week where you can maximise Verstappen's points from the sprint and the race itself. Perez I will also be keeping in the Red Bull due to his ability to either finish on the podium and score a large amount of points, or at least complete a lot of overtakes starting from lower down and still gaining a sufficient amount of points. This means he's still likely to have a higher points haul than Leclerc and Hamilton, who are the similar price range drivers and alternatives to Perez. Piastri, as I mentioned, I will be keeping over Stroll. It's close, but I just think that Piastri has the higher upside. And as you can see, I will be splitting the risk of McLaren and Aston Martin across my team. Alonso, I've had thoughts to change to Norris, but I'm unlikely to right now due to Norris's price rise and the feeling that Aston Martin will really suit this track and give Alonso yet another podium and therefore points haul for Fantasy Formula 1. For Guan Yu Zhou, it's a guessing game with him, Tsunoda, Sargent and now Ricciardo. My aim is to pick the driver that will qualify low down and then move up the field during the race to pick up the overtake and position gained bonuses. Zhou has been the best at this so far this season, so he's currently in my team. Although I do usually look out for the biggest gap between predicted qualifying performance and race performance when F1 releases the stats after FP2. Although my sentimental side would like to pick Ricciardo, so he may sneak in there before the deadline. Finally, Aston Martin versus McLaren. Red Bull will obviously be in the team. Whilst I have an urge to go for McLaren due to their recent upgrades and my sentimentality for the team, I think this track suits Aston Martin more, even if Stroll is holding back Aston Martin from full points. I will, however, wait to see the F1 expected performance levels after FP1 and FP2 before finalising my team. So that's my team for the Hungarian Grand Prix. Thanks for watching the video. I'll try and upload a final thoughts before the deadline to show my final team and any transfers that I've made, as well as any thoughts from FP1 and FP2. Let me know what your transfer plans are and whether you'll be going with Stroll or Piastri. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. If you've enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to see tips for future F1 races. This has been Fancy F1 Tips, and I'll see you in the next one.